Good
afternoon and welcome to today's presentation of the ACEDS webinar sponsored by ZyLAB, Optimizing Your Public Disclosure and FOIA Response Process. For those of you who aren't familiar with ACEDS, I'd like to briefly introduce you to the organization. We, of course, are a membership association, and we're committed to promoting e-discovery skill and competence through training, education, and networking. We offer the Certified e-discovery Specialist credential, which is held by more than 1,000 practitioners in the U.S. and globally. You can join today and start receiving a number of member benefits exclusive to our members, including news content, members-only webcasts, our Bits and Bytes newsletter, member directory, and special benefits from our affinity partners. But with that, I'd like to introduce you to our two presenters today. ACEDS is proud to have on the line today, we have Johannes Scholtes, who is the Chairman and Chief Strategy Officer at ZyLAB. Before joining ZyLAB, he was a lieutenant in the Intelligence Department of the Royal Dutch Navy. He holds a Master of Science degree in Computer Science from the Delft University of Technology and a PhD in Computational Linguistics from the University of Amsterdam. As of 2008, he holds an extraordinary chair in text mining from the Department of Knowledge Engineering at the University of Maastricht. We also have today Paul Gettmann, who is a product manager director at ZyLAB. He has more than 15 years of experience in litigation and investigation, technology consulting, project management, and hands-on processing, review, database administration. His focus is on advanced data analytics, predictive coding, and building and implementing legal holds, early data assessment, managing electronically stored information collection, review, and production software technologies and workflows. But with that, I'll turn it over to them in a second. I would like to let everyone know that we will take questions at the end. There should be a question window in the right-hand side of your screen, and we will monitor those throughout. We also will make a recording of this presentation available via the ACEDS website within a day or two. So with that, Jan, Paul?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Paul, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jason. We're excited to be on today and discuss some of the process improvement steps and some of the automations that we've found to be very helpful for clients who are working their way through public disclosure and FOIA responses. So I'm going to end up drawing some parallels and building a bridge of sorts between the world of e-discovery that I've spent most of my career in, and I can anticipate some of the folks on the call today have also been a part of as the ACEDS organization. So there's both public disclosure and e-discovery are an interesting area to work in because they require practitioners to really balance a sort of a system level understanding of the needs for transparency and cooperation between the parties, but they also have to take into account enterprise and citizen level needs for privacy and information security. So it makes for an interesting world to work in when optimizing process and technology, but it's also exciting because it's this sort of nuanced business process that makes the workflows all the more interesting. So today we're going to go through kind of 5 major areas. First of all, just kind of clearing up some terminology, kind of talking about what we're going to talk about. There's a variety of angles you can come at these topics from, and we're going to focus mostly on the IT and process automation side of the puzzle. And for those of you who caught the last webinar with Mary Mack and guests, it was a very good exploration of the legal ecosystem and history of FOIA and public disclosure. This is a follow-up to that. So then we're going to talk about some of the process similarities between public disclosure and e-discovery and move into some of the challenges of public disclosure. These will be very familiar to folks who have been practicing in e-discovery and why automation is so helpful and saves so much time and money. And then Jan's going to talk a bit about some of the more recent customer profiles that we've had and some of their success stories and how we've helped them automate some of their processes and help them reduce risk and save time and money. And then we're going to kind of take a look at, if you were to move through this process from left to right, so to speak, what would be some of the most impactful automation best practices throughout that data processing pipeline as you're reviewing and redacting and disclosing information? What have we seen that's most helpful? So first, to talk a little bit about the different terminology and sort of clarify what we're going to talk about today. There's a variety of angles you can come at the subject from, depending on what jurisdiction you're looking at, and therefore what laws govern that area of FOIA or public disclosure. They each have a different set of exemptions and response timelines, and there's a growing body of case law that's also very interesting to discuss. But if you didn't catch the last webinar I was talking about with Mary Mack and Daniel Metcalf, definitely check that out. Worthwhile. It's that one was really sort of the part one to this part two. So today we're mostly going to focus on the process and workflow automation, and then also talk about those client case studies I talked about. So I hadn't heard about sunshine laws until a few months ago, really, but increasingly now I'm recognizing how people refer to this area. Often what they're doing is using this as an umbrella term. It comes from the federal government in the Sunshine Act, and it's a really series of regulations that promote openness in government. So it's everything. It's not just making records available in a public disclosure context. It's just acknowledging that in democratic institutions, a lot of the meetings should be open to the public, that kind of thing. So it's kind of often used as an umbrella term for some of the other ones we'll talk about. Now, the Freedom of Information Act, maybe, though, is the one that more people have heard about because it's used in a broad context. It's often, in the news. Journalists often request records via this mechanism. That's how they find out about different things the government's doing, and so that's often a very public way of having heard about this. And then all 50 states have some form of public records law. They can be quite different from one another and quite different from the federal government, but they've all followed with some form of public disclosure type practice and case law. So as promised, I'm going to draw some high-level similarities now between public disclosure and EDiscovery as it relates to the practice for each of those. This is what we're looking at here is an infographic that the Department of Justice puts out, and it's very busy, so just kind of giving a snapshot of what we could talk about, but we're really going to focus on the how right in the middle there. You could do separate webinars on just who can make a FOIA request or a public records request, what agencies are required to do in response to that, what the timelines are, and you could really dissect this from a variety of angles. But we're gonna mostly take a look at what the process looks like from a high level first, and kind of get our bearings there, and then break it down into what types of automations are suited for this. So, basically, when a request comes in, there's three high-level processes you can think of this from as the agency begins to respond. So first, really, it's a matter of searching and identifying the information that's most appropriate for the disclosure response, and then so it's mostly step 3 is about search. Step 3 is about reviewing, maybe redacting the documents that you're going to end up disclosing, and then step 4 here, the final step, is about disclosing. And the world of EDiscovery, we call that production. So if you just look at the process at this level, this very high level, it's pretty similar across federal, state, and local. The way you're handling the information, the types of automations that are important as you're processing this pipeline of data is fairly similar. So there's similarities across different levels of government, and then there's also some similarities to the EDiscovery process that a lot of us have worked in. So, you know, what we're looking at here, and I won't spend too much time on the EDRM, that's the electronic discovery reference model. But basically what we're looking at is, you know, as you move from left to right, as you're identifying and searching through your data to find the stuff that's most responsive to that request, you're culling down the volume of that data and you're increasing the relevance. And so what I did is just mapped on top of this those three steps that we were talking about from the public disclosure process: search, review, and disclose. And those, you know, roughly fit over top of this flow as well. It just depends on how granular of a view you choose to dissect this into, how many steps you choose to enumerate. But there's some other levels of similarity that aren't displayed on here, but often what you're doing in the case of EDiscovery is as you're producing and deciding to withhold certain documents for privilege, like everybody's heard of attorney-client privilege, you end up producing what's called a privilege log in EDiscovery. And there's a rough equivalent on the FOIA side or the public disclosure side called the Vaughan Index. And that gives a chance for you to explain to the requesting party what documents you're withholding, or why, you know, the reasons for the redactions on the documents. What exemption code are you claiming for that exemption, for that redaction? And then finally, you know, there's always a production or disclosure at the end of that process. So this is kind of, you know, if you were just a document, this is what a day in the life of that document might look like, and there's a lot of similarities. So we could take a look at this from a different angle as well. I actually went to this 2014 Georgetown Law Conference, and so I looked it up when I was working on some of these slides just to remind myself because I remember there being a lot of topics where they were discussing the similarities of FOIA and EDiscovery, and these are some of the topics I pulled off the links below. So some of the topics they were discussing in the panels at that show were how FOIA can be better automated at these different phases: collection, review, production. And so the audience at the show, also probably similar to the audience here, was split between FOIA practitioners or public disclosure practitioners and EDiscovery. So then how a lot of the traditional FOIA processes are similar to handling EDiscovery requests, and they talked about the impact of recent case law as some of the federal rules are being imported into FOIA, and then some of the best practices of combining your FOIA and EDiscovery personnel or practice groups. Like once you've got a similar enough process, and maybe in some cases you're using the same software or a set of tools, how do you make sure that your people, process, and technology are all aligned, and when does it make sense to actually just combine those groups? You've got different timelines, different case law that's governing how you handle these requests, but a lot of the processing pipeline is similar enough to warrant combining the groups. And another angle of looking at the relationship between these two is from the judicial angle, and there were a lot of articles written in 2011 after Judge Shira Schindlin's opinion relating these two. So what she was basically saying was, look, the fundamental goal underlying both of these areas is similar enough, or basically the same. What you're trying to do is facilitate the exchange of information. And so she was saying, look, common sense dictates that parties should just cooperate. And then she went on to get more specific about that. What types of metadata do you need to include in your disclosure, and how is that similar to the world of the federal rules? She also recommended, and it's been recommended quite a lot since then, that there should be more of a formal meet and confer process in FOIA, very similar to the Rule 26 conference we're aware of in EDiscovery, where this pays a lot of dividends downstream in the process if the two opposing parties get together early on in the process and discuss what it is they're really looking for. What's the scope of discovery? What is the production format going to look like? And it just eliminates a lot of miscommunication and problems downstream. So this practice is becoming more and more recommended in the public disclosure space. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about some of the challenges of responding to FOIA requests, public disclosure requests, and how we've seen automation be so helpful in the public disclosure process. And if you're from the e-discovery world, you're going to recognize a lot of these challenges and benefits. So there's an ever-increasing volume of electronic information stored at enterprises, whether you're on the commercial side or, in this case, public side. And then the number of public disclosure requests are growing year over year. So you've got a lot more information to wade through and a lot more requests for that information. You're also seeing kind of more sophistication on the part of the requesting parties. They're asking for, in some cases, larger size and breadth of requests. So sometimes you'll see, say it's a large-scale construction project that's over budget, and it's a tunnel in a city, and you've got sometimes folks will ask for something very broad. Give me all the documents relating to mentioning, the particular contractor or the particular contract across all the data sources that you've got. So that can be very onerous and difficult for agencies to process. Becoming a lot more complex as well. So you've still got a lot of paper out there, and you've got the choice to make that searchable by scanning it and OCRing it to create text that's searchable. And there's a lot of FOIA requests that we've seen, or public disclosure requests from the folks who are handling it have to do with things like construction, talking about earlier. So you've got architectural blueprints, things that aren't necessarily really easy to process or review or collect. So you've got structured and unstructured data. So you've got dedicated databases for specific uses. That's structured information. And then you've got what we're really familiar with in eDiscovery, which is just a lot of the email and office documents, the unstructured data that you use to processing. And then, of course, you've got these formats for audio and video and social media. So some of the folks that we've talked to that are trying to process this stuff manually and review it in its native format, and then maybe use like a PDF toolkit to turn it into some sort of an image to consolidate it for disclosure, it can be several ad hoc processes that have to funnel into a united process that can be difficult to manage. So a dedicated tool really helps, and a dedicated tool then really helps align the process and the personnel that are handling it as well. So data can be also very distributed, spread out by department, geography. Some of it's on-premise. Almost every commercial enterprise that we've been working with and government is straddling cloud and on-premise to some extent. There's a little bit of data in both places. And then all of these complications on the top side of the slide are conspiring to raise the costs, really, along with the short timelines, the final bullet. So the more data and the more variety, the higher volume and higher variety of data that you've got, and the shorter the timeline, all raises the cost of personnel that they're using to, in some cases, manually search and process and review this data. So a lot of the response times are pretty short. 20 days, 20 working days is often a timeline that folks work with in the FOIA world. So here are a couple charts, just kind of giving a quick visual orientation how these are from FOIA.gov. And so we're seeing a lot of increase just year over year for FOIA requests in general. This is across all federal agencies, the chart on the left. The chart on the right kind of tells a similar story as the number of requests themselves go up. Some departments, not all of them, but some are falling further behind, just trying to keep up with the volume these requests. And some of the biggest contributors to these backlogs that were cited here have to do with the increasing number of requests and the increasing complexity, data types, storage locations of that data. And then some of the things that they went on to talk about, the third most important thing here, fourth, I guess, is, they were talking about lost staff and priorities, but what they were really talking about was process. And if you don't have, if you've got multiple technologies and multiple processes, when you lose people in a situation like that, a lot of the process walks out the door as well. So they're talking about the importance of having those three things aligned in order to really kind of recover from just general staff turnover or other things like that. So this all culminates into a maturing of this practice area, like we've seen in EDiscovery as well, where there's really an effort to kind of turn what's kind of a series of punctuated fire drills into something that a CIO of an enterprise would like to have established as a more defensible business process. That's where you start to really reduce risk and reduce costs and make these processes bearable. So all the increased volume, complexity, and backlogs added together with the mandates for the balancing act that we were talking about for defensibility and transparency, but also privacy and security, that's all added up to quite a challenge for some agencies. But we're going to talk a little bit here more about some of the resolutions and how people are resolving these business process challenges with standardization and technology automation. And I'm going to turn it over to Jan for just a couple of minutes, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the more recent customer success stories we've seen.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Paul. Can you hear me well?
Yep. Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you very much. Yeah, we wanted to illustrate this a little bit with a couple of case studies, and describe how they used our technology to automate part of this process. Like Paul said, you have to change it from a fire drill into a daily operating procedure, which is defensible and well documented. We have one of our clients is a major city on the U.S. West Coast, and even though the city is not very large, they have about 18,000 public records requests a year, which is a lot of requests. And then on top of that, they also have several internal investigations. Total number of custodians in the city that they have to collect from is 800. And typically, what we see these days, because mailboxes, the average mailbox is about 5 to 10 gigabytes these days. And of course, you don't collect from all of the users, but the average collection in certain time periods that they do is from 40 to 100 gigabytes a case. And they collect from email, file shares. Audio is becoming more and more topic of public records disclosure, also in relation to the sound component or audio component of a video file. And then they need to disclose this data, and preferably you don't want to disclose it on paper. You want to disclose it in an electronic file format, either TIFF or PDF, in image format, which can also be redacted. And that's the next part. Now, when this client started using our technology, this process was a process which was done with a lot of effort. And if you take me to the next slide, Paul, what you see here is the process that Paul described before. You see the intake, the search, the date ranges, the custodians, which is much easier with our technology. You see the classification. In FOIA, it's often pretty clear which type of documents people are interested in. The real question, or the real labor-intensive part, is to take those documents and those document sections out which may harm people. So you want to find the potential exceptions and exemptions. And you don't want to miss one, because if you miss one of these exceptions, the damage can be irreparable. The other thing is that different cities, different states, different agencies charge different fees for different disclosure sizes. Some charge by the page, some give you a number of pages for free, and they charge for the additional pages. So this is something where they need to, you can call it negotiate with the requester, because the requester has to be able to pay it, and you don't want to do a lot of work and then find out that the requester cannot pay it. And if you've already done the work, it's not very efficient. Redaction is very important. Review is very important. You have to review the redactions. You have to tag it with exemption codes, and the more you can automate, the better. And then you have to disclose it and to the requester. And one of the things that's very important in FOIA, which is sometimes forgotten, is you also have to manage your disclosures, and you have to remember what you disclosed. There's some great documentaries from Michael Moore where he actually takes disclosures from different departments and then he puts them on top of each other, and then he's able to see text in some disclosures from some department that were redacted by other departments. And at the end of the day, this is how he's able to actually find a lot of content from a lot of documents by just combining all these different disclosures. So you have to manage your disclosures. You have to also apply your retention policies. Now, what we've seen by automating this whole process, because there's a lot of places where this can go wrong, we've seen that this organization has reduced the time to respond to only 30%, 33% of the original time. There's a lot of duplicate documents that they were able to reduce. So sometimes even from 700 to 100. So your disclosures are much smaller. By working electronically, they no longer have to do paper reviews, paper redaction. If you are still doing redactions with a black marker, you may have noticed that copier devices are very efficient these days, and you have to do it 3 or 4 times before you can really no longer read it, because sometimes copiers just copy through the black marker and you can still read it. And every redaction that you apply manually can easily be attached to a $1 cost, and sometimes even more, let alone the fact that it's a lot of work, which is very sensitive for errors. The whole workflow between departments has been highly optimized. What we see, and Paul will show you a couple of examples, is that in FOIA you can get disclosures from many different departments in cities or in states. You can have to deal with the police department, the fire department. You can have to deal with like the mayor's office, councils, legal, and in larger and even in smaller cities, you have to do a lot of cooperation. And by using technology in one common system for the workflow of all the documents, it's much more efficient to have the different departments, paralegals and attorneys work together. And like Paul said, there's a lot of similarities between EDiscovery and FOIA, or public records requests. So this is also something this organization achieved, a lot of synergy. Take me to the next slide, Paul. There's another city, and this was actually an interesting city. This was a city which moved all their data into Microsoft Office 365. And what they did is, instead of doing all the FOIA work on premises with computers, which were not in the cloud, they decided to deploy our whole system also in the cloud. So they used Azure, and what they did is they, by using Azure, they are able to connect directly to Office 365 in the cloud. So instead of having to download all the data from the cloud to on-premises, which, if you've ever tried it, you see that. I talked to somebody today who told me that only downloading 5 gigabytes of data from mailboxes which were converted in the cloud to PSTs took him 2 days, and he had to to restart the process several times because his connections were interrupted and the PSTs appeared to be corrupt. And this is a big problem with a lot of cloud solutions. It has to do with the unreliability of wide area network connections, and also with the fact that it's easier to get stuff into the cloud than to take it out. So what we did at ZyLAB, we took an approach where we're actually, because of our virtual machine architecture, it's very easy for us to deploy the whole software in Azure. And then in Azure, which is the Azure with Microsoft is always very close to the data center of the 365 installation of that particular client, so you can benefit from very high bandwidth connections. And then instead of downloading entire mailboxes, what we do is we connect, we the data from the relevant custodians for the relevant time periods. We do all the processing in Azure. We do the automatic tagging and organizing, and we remove the really non-redundant, really non-relevant data. We apply automation as much as possible, and then all we download is the data that needs to be disclosed, and that's always a small fraction of the data which was originally collected. Now, this client labeled our software as a productivity revolution compared to the other tools they were using in the past. And we have several of these type of client stories in the federal, state, and local governments. And like Paul said, a lot of times they have to do with state organizations responsible for either environmental issues, or organizations responsible for transportation, or very large construction, or utilities. And these organizations are more and more subject of disclosure requests from a variety of sources, from civilians, citizens, environmental organizations, from all kinds of people, and it's causing a lot of work for them. So so these are just a couple of stories. If you're interested in more stories, we have an extended white paper on FOIA, and that contains a couple of more stories as well. Okay, back to you, Paul, I think, right? So you can show us how we can use automation to make this all happen.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. Yeah, this last client was really exciting because they not only benefited from some of those automation steps that the first client benefited from, but because they were running in the cloud, it was this whole kind of second layer of process improvement on top of it. It wasn't now it was automation at the beginning, but then now they're benefiting from a lot of the scalability and speed, and then reduced cost of storage and
yeah, I think especially the reduced cost of storage was phenomenal, right? It was like 5 times cheaper than the storage. That's a great benefit measure, especially what we see with these. I forgot this. What we see with these FOIA requests is that although there's a high frequency of them, there are periods when there are no FOIA requests. So what we see is that these clients, what they can do, they can actually spin down the whole installation when they're not using it for FOIA processing, and then you have very little cost compared to when you have all these machines up. And especially with EDiscovery, where you have these huge data volumes you need to maintain, if you can spin down certain machines that all you need them for storage, it's I think that's at 5 times less cost, right?
Yeah, that's what they were saying.
Yeah. Okay, back to you.
All right. So we're going to go through now. If we kind of pretend, if we think back to that electronic discovery reference model, or the steps in public disclosure, we're going to go through what some of the best practices in automation are from left to right. So things that we've seen work really well. Not all of our clients in this space are using all of these, but adding up just a few of them really helps revolutionize a process. So some of our clients are making use of an automated preservation archiving workflow to kick this all off at the very left-hand side of this process. So what if you're able to pre-index a lot of the data sources that are most critical to public disclosure? And most folks in eDiscovery and in this space as well. If you ask them, what are your organization's usual suspects? What are people coming back for time and time again? You find yourself recollecting information about the same projects that were, say, in trouble, or from the same custodians, or from this. So there's some data sources, custodians, years, things that are collected repeatedly, and if you can identify those, email is very common. That's because that's where most contracts are attached and where most discussions of things happen these days. So email is a very common data source subject to a lot of these requests. So what if you could take those most common data sources and pre-index them? And what we mean by index is it's a deeply indexed source at that point, so that stuff that you can't search in Outlook currently. You can't search things that are image only, things that don't have a text layer to them. So when they're imported into a system like this, they've been OCR'd, there's text extracted. You can now search on that. You can now search on audio and video files and search the associated metadata with all of these things as well, and filter on that metadata. So customers really see value from this in several ways. It's just a gigantic head start. It saves all of that usual upfront manual thought and processing and hunting for the data, or recollecting it all over again. And you're kind of guaranteed, if you know where these high value information targets are, you're searching those first. Those are the ones that are available to you first, and it gives you a real head start in figuring out what you're up against in a particular response, and allows you kind of to quickly assess the risk of the disclosure and the timelines and how much personnel you're going to need to respond to this. So it just saves a ton of time and money at all the steps downstream from this that we're going to talk about. So this is an emerging area that we're seeing a lot more interest in. So if we go one step further to the right, say you don't necessarily have that archive already being preserved with your most common data sets, but say you're ready to go though. Say you've already got some connectors to your native data sources and you're ready to collect, so that you've got something connected to Exchange and SharePoint and your file systems and Office 365, so that when a new request comes in the door, you're ready at this point to point at 10 custodians over a 5-year period and pull the trigger and collect. That's a huge time saving as well. It gets you off the starting gun a lot faster if you know you can already collect from these sources. You don't have to go find them and configure your software at that point to try to do this. So each disclosure in this case can be completed a lot more quickly and more cheaply, and the game here often is just trying to get the most high value documents into the hands of your subject matter experts as soon as possible. You want them to look at the most important stuff first, not the other way around. So you want to get this stuff into the hands of the public disclosure officers or FOIA officers as quickly as possible. So another area, this is a long-standing area of automation in the world of just simple deduplication. It's simple and yet extremely powerful. If you have the ability to identify and remove duplicate files within or across all your custodians, depending on the needs of that request, you can save yourself a lot of time and effort downstream. So you don't have to process this stuff. You're not spending time indexing it, and most importantly, you're not wasting time of the subject matter experts who are having to view duplicate copies of the same file over and over again. And as Jan alluded to earlier, there's this inherent risk in doing that as well. You look at the same document 10 times, and your likelihood increases that you're going to start coding that document inconsistently. You're going to find exceptions in one version of it and then let it through in the next version, and those inconsistencies can be a real problem downstream. So there's a lot more we could talk about here, but I'm just going to run through a couple examples. One of the things that you can do with technology here is automate some of the data enrichment that's happening while you're extracting the text and the metadata. So it doesn't have to be a sequential process that that runs tomorrow. It's stuff that can be happening while you're processing your data, and you can do things like identify, so you can identify all the language documents that have non-English in them across your population, and then also, if you're an English-speaking group anyway, and then use machine translation to take that same set of documents and create an English version of the text. Then you've got something that you can work with right away. Named entity extraction or recognition is something that folks sometimes choose here, and if you've got the ability to extract all the major people, places, and things and call those out separately, you can then build visualizations around those downstream, or use facets to highlight just those organizations and people that are most important to this particular investigation. You can also pre-tag all the documents that match certain patterns, social security numbers or other client account numbers of sorts. So tag this personally identifiable information up front so that you're a lot less likely to miss it later on. It's just a nice way to have it pre-tagged, set aside in a pie chart or facet somewhere where you can easily click on it and you don't miss it later on. So it reduces risk and saves a lot of time and money. Something very similar that folks do in our world anyway is after processing happens, you can also set up a series of auto-classification rules or analytics scenarios and slice and dice your data according to these. And in a simple way, what these are just saved searches that you can trigger to run at ingestion time or on a continuous basis. And so you can imagine if you're working on a request that has to do with that specific construction project, and you've got requests for all the contractors and bids and amendments to this project, it'd be nice to be able to find instances of those named entities and start using auto classification to slice and dice your data set, so that when your subject matter experts get their hands on this, they're able to dive straight into the documents that are most important, the fastest. So if you've got pre-created buckets for each of those keywords and metadata facets that are most important. And of course, customers get value out of this by just getting to the most important data the quickest and speeding up the disclosure process. So data visualization, then, if you can automate a lot of what we've been talking about in the last several steps, and it really culminates into something valuable for the the folks running this, the analysts running this operation. It really culminates in data visualization. If you can take all those predefined facets that you've been mining out of your data, exemption codes, departments, custodians, certain hot keywords, and turn those into something that's clickable and interactive for the user, that's a real benefit, and that's where they start to see the value of it. So these are configurable, so you can decide on a case-by-case basis and save templates based on which data facets are most useful to that practice group that you're working with. But yeah, being able to create pie charts and other visualizations for project, custodian, department is very valuable. And of course, it saves a lot of time, you locate information faster, and you're just making sound decisions a lot sooner. There's several types of reports you can run in tools like this, and this is just one example of one that helps facilitate discussions between the parties. So what if you can automate disclosure cost reporting? After you've imported your documents and you've done at least a cursory look at it, you'll have an idea of what the volume of disclosable information is for that particular request. And if you can run a report at that point and calculate, what you're looking at in terms of printing cost, or if you're producing, electronically, oftentimes you're sharing the cost of this request with the requesting party. So it gives you a bargaining chip or a discussion point to say, all right, well, that big construction tunnel project that you were interested in, the request that you asked for actually generated 10 million records. What are you really looking for, and can we cull this down and make it cheaper for you and easier for us? And it just saves a lot of headaches downstream if you have the ability to meet early and often and confer with the requesting party. So what if you could, in some of those upfront steps as well, specify keywords with different saved queries, Boolean queries, and even regular expressions like pattern searches. What if you could specify certain things that you're looking for with these pattern searches and have all of the instances across your matter highlighted and available to you? It just calls them out to the reviewers later on and helps them make better decisions. So Social Security numbers is a very common example here, but there's all sorts of other account numbers, and in this case a version number that can be very important to find, and you can use patterns to find those as well. So automating searching and tagging is a common practice in eDiscovery, but there's several layers of this, and you can build them on top of one another. So you can search for patterns, and you can have those highlight throughout your case. You can also then tag all the instances where you've got those patterns highlighted, and then it makes it really easy to find your way back to just those documents that have been tagged and redact them. So you can quickly find all the Social Security patterns across your data set, and then quickly move over to redacting them for personally identifiable information exemption codes. And this just saves a lot of time and reduces risk of accidentally disclosing identifiable information. Kind of a second example of the same type of process automation here, though, is the four-way OCRing that I mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of document types, whether they started out in paper or electronic format, that have text written in different directions that aren't easily indexed by most tools. And you have to OCR them, but you have to have special OCR if you want to get to the vertical and horizontal text on the page. So, and of course, if you're not indexing the text, then you're not searching on it. You're not getting full recall on your searches if you're missing some of that text. So this has become a very important piece of the puzzle to make sure all pieces of text are deeply searchable in your matter. This is like another step on top of the last three or so that we've been talking about, where you can automate hit highlighting, you can automate searching, saved searches, you can automate the tagging of those and the exemption coding of those. You can also just set up, if you know ahead of time that you're going to have a lot of Social Security numbers, why not just set up some regular expressions to identify all number patterns that have a 3-number pattern separated by a 2-number, and then -4 number, and just have those automatically redacted off the top. You can always find your way back to these because they're marked in the system as the documents that were redacted. So you can always, review those again to make sure that the redaction got applied properly and that you're applying the right exemption code to it. So the automatic nature of this doesn't have to mean you're just never looking at it again, but it just reduces a lot of risk, and it helps you find and call out those documents that have PII, for example, in them early and find your way back to them. So automatic tagging decisions, this slide actually combines several layers of automation and several layers of efficiency all in one. So I'm just combining the talking points here. But studies in eDiscovery or papers over the last decade or so have shown that if folks are reviewing documents in the context of the parent email and the child attachments, their review decision making, their productivity goes up by 15 to 20%, and that's for parent-child family groupings. And if you're also looking at things in the context of an email threads, that's that's the section down here below, and conversation threading. Then you're also getting the context of what the email correspondence we're talking to back and forth. So it's much more efficient to see a parent-child grouping and an email thread all in the context instead of coming back to pieces of that thread or family group over the course of looking at documents. So you're a lot faster at moving through. You reduce the risk of coding these things inconsistently. And if you have the ability then to bulk tag an entire family group or bulk tag an entire email thread, then taking this bulk action saves a lot of time as well. So that's kind of the third part to this. So audio and video search is something that's it's just more and more common. And if you don't have the ability to actually search and get hit results within audio files, it's been something that folks, even in eDiscovery, were ignoring years ago, and it's increasingly impossible to ignore that. It's considered electronically stored information that's indeed discoverable, and you have to, it's incumbent upon you to look through this stuff and search it. So being able to do this is beyond some organizations' ability altogether, but being able to do it well is another whole level. So you don't want to disclose any of the stuff that you haven't looked through and searched, but increasingly you can get in trouble for not disclosing it. So it's one of those capabilities that we've seen really beyond the increasingly requested by our users. And so we talked a little bit earlier about automating privilege logs and the associated VON index. So I used to work in eDiscovery, and creating privilege logs was from scratch was a big pain. And over time, tools gave you the ability to export your saved searches and only the columns that you wanted, and also add some other optimizations so that you can quickly and easily take all the documents that you've deemed to have exceptions in them or have some sort of attorney-client privilege in them and quickly report on those documents. Sometimes you still have to add some subjective coding to that and then explain exactly why that exemption code is relevant to that document. But just being able to automate, say, 3/4 of it is a huge time savings, and we're seeing folks do that in this space as well. You can take any number of columns and any number of rows through your saved search, export it to CSV, refine it in either Excel or a Word table, and then add any extra augmentation that you need to. And then finally, I think this is one of our last slides where we're getting toward the right-hand side. You're almost done with your process. If you're able to just take that set of 10,000 documents that you've distilled down from 1 million and finally just automatically pull the trigger and export those as PDFs or TIFFs, in a National Archives accepted format, and also export other artifacts that the requesting party needs. Maybe they need native files for some documents. Maybe they need extracted text and load files. It's a common export combination in eDiscovery. But being able to do that in an efficient and defensible manner at the end of your process, where you get nice reports on anything that didn't succeed, all that adds up to a very defensible process. So we kind of took a look at each of these process efficiencies on their own, but really it's a matter of taking a look at the number of features and the amount of time and money savings from each of them, and you start adding those up and you get quite a bit of process efficiency over the course of a workflow. And I think that takes us to Q&A. So if we've gotten any questions over the course of this, I think Jason may have been collecting a few, and we're happy to take questions and continue this conversation through Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And I think I don't know if you have your contact info available. I think people have other questions. We can also send that your way. I know this was sort of a practical, hands-on conversation, there was one comment sort of on from a legal side. Someone was noting that the case that was cited, the National Day Laborers by Judge Schindlin, I believe that case was withdrawn. So it's not of legal precedent. It is a fascinating and interesting case to read, though, on this topic. So that's more of a comment than a question. But one person was asking about the annual report mentioned. Is it possible to generate that?
I'm trying to make sure I understand the question real quick. Is it annual report, or is it the Vaughan index? Is that what they're asking about?
They said it says annual report. Was that was there a report that you can generate that?
Yeah, I'll try and answer it in terms of Vaughan index. I think that might be what they're getting at. Jan also mentioned some white papers and some ebooks that we have on this topic, but I'm guessing what they're asking is about the if they're asking about the ability to automatically create reports out of the system, it might be like the privilege log or the Vaughan index.
Yeah, or what you did, everything you disclosed in a year probably, and that has to do also with retention, I believe.
Okay.
And that's what we can do a variety of reports. The Vaughan index is more to create a report of everything you withheld, but from our audit logs and from all the statistics we keep in our database is just a standard SQL server. So you can also generate, okay, what was productivity, how much disclosures did we do, how large was every disclosure, and that kind of management statistics you can all obtain from our database.
Great, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's actually all the big questions we have for now. That takes us up pretty close to the hour, so I think we'll wrap it up there. But as mentioned, please feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions and information. I know the ZyLAB folks can do live product demos at any time on request. And as they mentioned, there's a lot of materials that will be available on this topic. Let's see. Yeah, as I mentioned, we will make a recording of this presentation available on the ACID's website. That should be up at least definitely by tomorrow, and we'll make a copy of the presentation available as well. So with that, Jan, Paul, I don't know if you have any other comments or things to add.
Not for me. Just yeah, thanks so much for having us on.
It was I think a great webinar. Very well explained, Paul. Great job.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks.
Having you guys, having both of you guys available. And as mentioned, this was the second part of a two-part series. So if you missed it, I also encourage anyone to go back and listen to the first part, the interview with Mr. Metcalf, who is a fascinating.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and obviously knows everything there is to know about FOIA and the process of managing public records. So with that, thanks to ZyLAB, and thanks to everyone for attending.
All right. Thanks, ACIDs.